Before I begin, let me warn you about something very important, because this isn't a comfortable video to watch, it's a necessary one. If you've ever felt that tightness in your chest when you look at your bank balance, even after working the entire month, if you've ever promised yourself, next month I'll get organized, and yet nothing changes, then pay attention. Because the mistakes I'm going to show you here aren't the mistakes of irresponsible people, they're the mistakes of ordinary people. Tired people, people who are just trying to survive financially. And the problem is, these mistakes don't make noise. They don't blow up all at once. They bleed you slowly, month after month, until one day you realize you lost years of your financial life without even understanding where the money went. And maybe the worst part is realizing you always thought the problem was that you didn't make enough, when in reality the problem was the invisible decisions you make every day without noticing. I want you to think of a simple, very real situation right now. Imagine you finally managed to save a little money. It's not much, but it's enough to make you feel some relief. And along with that relief comes a strange feeling, almost a constant fear of losing it. You start thinking twice before spending. You get tense. When a small, unexpected expense shows up, you start feeling guilty, even for basic things. That happens because most people never learned how to deal with money emotionally. They only learned to react to it. And that's exactly where the expensive mistakes begin. Not just in your wallet, but in your mental health, your sleep, and your peace. The first financial mistake that destroys a lot of people's lives starts with a seemingly harmless phrase. I'll look at it later. I'll look at this bill later. I'll look at this expense later. I'll figure out how to organize later. I'll figure out how to get out of this later. That constant postponing creates a dangerous illusion that the problem still isn't serious enough to face right now. But while you postpone, interest doesn't postpone. Bills don't postpone. Anxiety doesn't postpone. It keeps building. The problem isn't that you don't know how to organize your money. The problem is running from your financial reality because you're afraid to face numbers that hurt your ego, because looking your financial situation in the face hurts. It makes you feel behind, incompetent, different from everyone else. So your mind creates a simple defense, pushing it off. But every time you do that, you pay an invisible price, which is living with the constant feeling that something is wrong, even in moments when you should be calm. This mistake makes small debts turn into snowballs. It makes small expenses, things that could be adjusted, become fixed habits. It makes you live in emergency mode all the time, even when nothing serious is happening. And the cruelest part is that over time, that anxiety becomes normal. You wake up tired, you fall asleep worried, and you start thinking that's just adulthood. It's not. It's the cost of delaying simple decisions for too long. The second financial mistake is even more common and more socially accepted: spending to relieve emotions. Not spending because you need to, but spending because you're tired, frustrated, sad, or feeling like life has been unfair to you. You work hard, you push yourself, you feel like you're not getting anywhere, and somehow spending becomes a form of compensation. Ordering delivery, buying something in installments, anything that gives you a quick hit of reward. The problem isn't the spending itself, it's the emotional role it starts to play. When money becomes emotional anesthesia, it stops being a tool and becomes a problem. And here's a delicate point, because nobody likes admitting it. But many times, you don't buy because you want to. You buy because you need to feel something good that day. And that creates a silent cycle. You spend to feel better, then guilt hits, then pressure, then more frustration, and then you spend again. That cycle doesn't show up in any spreadsheet, but it drains your income month after month. And the tighter things get, the more you feel like you deserve relief, and the harder it becomes to break the pattern. This mistake is expensive because it keeps you living on the edge. You never feel like you're building anything, just surviving from one paycheck to the next. And the worst part is that when someone talks to you about financial organization, you almost feel angry because it sounds like they're ignoring your exhaustion, your reality, the weight of your routine. But the truth is, as long as money keeps being used as an emotional escape valve, no strategy will truly work. Up to this point, you may have related to more things than you'd like. And this isn't to blame you, it's to show you these mistakes aren't character flaws. They're consequences of a financially stressful life, without clarity and without structure. And the problem isn't that you mess up a lot, it's that you've never had the mental space to think differently. These first two mistakes alone are enough to keep anyone stuck in a cycle of financial pressure for years. And the most dangerous part is how they reinforce each other. The more you delay, the more overwhelmed you feel. The more overwhelmed you feel, the more you look for quick relief. And the more quick relief you seek, the harder it becomes to face reality later. And what almost nobody tells you is that these mistakes don't start big. They start small, almost invisible, mixed into your routine, your exhaustion, and the feeling that you're doing the best you can. And maybe you are. But doing the best you can without clarity can still cost you a lot over time. The third financial mistake is one of the most expensive and at the same time, one of the hardest to accept because it looks like responsibility, it looks like maturity, it even looks like intelligence. That mistake is thinking that paying in installments means you're organized. You look at an installment purchase and feel relief because it fits this month. And that thought repeats so many times that when you finally notice, your paycheck isn't yours anymore. It hits your account already committed. Installments create a false sense of control. You don't feel the full impact of the decision. You only feel small monthly bites that seem harmless. The problem is, those bites silently pile up. A phone here, an appliance there, clothes, subscriptions, a gift, all in installments. Each payment by itself seems small, but together they build an invisible prison. You start the month already owing on past decisions. You work today to pay for choices that don't even excite you anymore. And the cruelest part is that emotionally, it wears you down. You feel like you work and work and work, but never move forward because you really don't. You're running on a financial treadmill. Money comes in and goes out at the same pace, leaving no trace, creating no space, no breathing room. And when something unexpected happens, there's no margin. Anything off script turns into panic. This mistake is expensive because it steals your future little by little. Not all Achi ones, month after month. It keeps you from building any real emergency fund because there's always something to pay. And the most dangerous part is that installments don't hurt right now. They only hurt later. They hurt when you realize you're stuck in a pattern that feels impossible to break. They hurt when you realize a big part of your stress isn't how much you make, but how much of your paycheck is already gone before you can even breathe. And a lot of people feel ashamed of this. They avoid looking at the statement, avoid adding everything up, avoid thinking about the total because adding it up hurts. Adding it up shows that small decisions made without planning turned into something too heavy. And then the mind does what it does best to protect itself. It ignores it, but ignoring it doesn't solve anything. It only drags it out. This mistake creates a constant feeling of suffocation. Even in good months, you don't feel relief. Even when nothing goes wrong, you tense. Because deep down, you're living on the edge. And living on the edge is exhausting. It exhausts your body, your mind, your hope. The fourth financial mistake is silent, socially encouraged, and emotionally devastating. Living by comparing your financial life to other people's. You look at people your age in your family, at work, on social media, and you start thinking you're the only one behind, that you're the only one who didn't make it, that you're the only one who messed up too much. And that comparison creates an invisible but constant pressure that directly influences how you spend your money. You start spending not to meet your needs, but to not feel smaller, to not look like a failure, to not fall behind. And many times you don't even notice it consciously. You just feel a strange discomfort watching other people's lives move forward while yours seems stuck. And that discomfort turns into bad financial decisions, into spending. That doesn't make sense. Into rushed choices. Into commitments you can't afford, but you take on anyway. The problem is you're never comparing complete realities. You're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. You see achievements, but you don't see debt. You see trips, but you don't see payments. You see comfort, but you don't see anxiety. And meanwhile, you start demanding of yourself for not living a life that may not even be sustainable for the people who seem to have it. This mistake is expensive because it completely scrambles your priorities. You start spending energy, money, and time trying to prove something to people who don't even know you exist. And in the process, you drift away from what actually matters. Stability, peace, clarity. You start making financial decisions that don't match your reality, your paycheck, your season of life. And that creates a constant feeling of not being enough. Like you're always behind, always chasing, always owing something. Even when you achieve something, the satisfaction doesn't last because soon someone shows up with something better. And then you feel like it's never enough. You never earn enough. You never do enough. You never get there. This mistake doesn't just hurt your wallet, it destroys your financial self. You start seeing yourself as someone who can't handle money when in reality, you're trying to live a life that doesn't fit your current reality. And while you try to maintain an image, your financial life becomes more fragile. The saddest part is that nobody talks about it openly. Everyone pretends everything is fine, and you feel alone, thinking you're the only one struggling. But the truth is, a lot of people are falling apart on the inside, just well-dressed on the outside. The fifth financial mistake often goes unnoticed because it disguises itself as hope. It's believing the problem will solve itself when your income increases. There's a very common idea that your financial life is only hard right now, that it's just a phase, that when you make a little more, everything will fall into place. And that belief becomes dangerous comfort because it delays changes that need to happen now. Someone spends months, sometimes years, living on the edge, repeating to themselves that everything will get better when a promotion comes, when they change jobs, when they pick up an extra side gig, when income finally goes up. But while that doesn't happen, their financial behavior stays exactly the same. Expenses follow any increase in income almost automatically. The pressure changes size, but it doesn't disappear. This mistake is expensive because it creates a fake finish line, a feeling that it's not time yet to get truly organized, as if organization were a prize reserved only for people who earn more. And so the person lives in waiting mode, tolerating stress, accepting anxiety, normalizing the lack of control, because they believe they haven't reached the right level to take care of their money. The problem is that when income goes up without a structural change, the relief is temporary. In the first months, it feels like it finally worked. Bills are easier to pay, a little more is left over, the suffocation eases, but soon commitments grow. Lifestyle creeps up, new expenses appear, and the old pressure comes back just at a different level. This mistake creates deep frustration, because when the raise comes and nothing truly changes, you get the feeling that even making more doesn't improve life. And that hurts. It hurts because it collapses the last simple hope you had. The idea that the problem was only not having enough money starts to fall apart, and in its place comes emptiness, confusion, the feeling of being lost. And the quietest part is that while this belief isn't broken, no solution lasts, because every attempt to adjust is made as a temporary fix, without real commitment. After all, in your mind, all of it is temporary. But temporary becomes permanent, and life keeps passing in survival mode. The sixth financial mistake is emotionally heavy and rarely recognized as a mistake. It's confusing what you deserve with what you can afford. The person works hard, pushes through pressure, frustration, physical and mental exhaustion, and at some point, an internal feeling grows that they deserve something in return. They deserve comfort, they deserve a treat, they deserve a little pleasure in the middle of so much obligation. The problem starts when that sense of deserving ignores financial reality. It's not a conscious decision to overspend, it's an emotional justification. The logic becomes something like, after everything I've done, this is the least I can have. And then expenses get approved, not by the budget, but by accumulated exhaustion. This mistake is expensive because it doesn't happen just once. It repeats. Every hard week becomes a reason. Every heavy month becomes an excuse. And little by little, money starts being used to compensate for a life that isn't balanced. But money doesn't fix that imbalance. It only masks it for a few moments. After the temporary relief comes the bill, and with it comes guilt. A quiet guilt that isn't said out loud, but it weighs on you. The person starts judging themselves, thinking they're weak, disorganized, incapable of staying in control. And that internal judgment makes the relationship with money even worse. This mistake creates a dangerous emotional cycle. The more exhausted someone feels from their own routine, the more they feel they deserve to spend. The more they spend, the tighter things get. The tighter things get, the more stressful life becomes. And the more stress, the stronger the need to compensate. It's a cycle that doesn't show up in statements, but it shows up in constant exhaustion. And the cruelest part is that this mistake often comes with silence. People don't talk about this with anyone. It feels embarrassing to admit money is being used to cover emotional holes. So everything stays trapped inside. The frustration, the fear, the feeling of failing, and the financial problem grows along with the emotional weight. The seventh financial mistake is believing the problem is only the big expenses. There's a natural tendency to blame what's most visible, most expensive, most obvious. Rent, the loan, the car, the credit card. And because of that, the small leaks go unnoticed, expenses that seem irrelevant on their own. but together ruin any attempt at stability. These expenses don't stand out because they're part of the routine. They're so integrated into daily life that they stop being questioned. Subscriptions you barely use, ignored fees, frequent small purchases, duplicated services, automatic habits. None of it seems serious. None of it creates urgency, and that's exactly why it keeps happening. The problem is that these leaks create the constant feeling that money disappears. You work, you get paid, you cover the basics, and when you look, there's almost nothing left. There wasn't one big mistake. There wasn't one absurd decision, just a sum of small choices made on autopilot, with no clear intention. This mistake is expensive because it destroys your trust in your own ability to control things. You start feeling like money slips through your fingers, like it's useless to try to organize because something is always missing at the end. And that feeling leads to giving up. The person stops trying to understand, stops adjusting, stops paying attention. Over time, this loss of control becomes a silent identity. The person starts seeing themselves as someone who can't handle money, when in reality, they've never stopped to see the whole picture. They've never managed to step out of survival mode and into observation mode. And as long as that doesn't happen, the leaks continue. This mistake is dangerous because it doesn't cause immediate pain. It causes wear and tear. A constant financial fatigue, a frustration that's hard to explain, a feeling of effort without reward. And since there's no clear villain, the problem feels unsolvable. The eighth financial mistake is born from a lack of clarity, but is maintained by confusion. It's not knowing exactly how much it costs to live, not because you don't care, but because of mental overload. Bills spread out, different due dates, changing amounts, everything mixed up in your head. And when everything is confusing, every decision feels heavy. The person avoids adding it up, avoids looking at the total, avoids facing the full reality because it feels like too much. So they handle their finances in the short term, pay what's due now, put out this month's fire, push the rest to later, not out of irresponsibility, but out of exhaustion. This mistake is expensive because it keeps your financial life in constant improvisation. Without clarity, there's no planning. Without planning, there are no conscious choices. Everything becomes reaction. Reaction to bills, reaction to messages, reaction to collections, reaction to emergencies. And living in reaction mode is deeply exhausting. The person feels like they never have peace. Even when everything seems up to date, there's tension in the air, the feeling something was forgotten, that some bill will show up, that the balance is too fragile to trust. Over time, this confusion creates paralysis. The person knows they need to organize, but they don't know where to start. And the more time passes, the stronger the feeling of being behind becomes. Starting feels too hard, and then they don't start, and the cycle continues. This mistake is quiet because it doesn't explode. It drains. It drains energy, drains focus, drains hope, and it makes your financial life a constant background weight, even on good days. The ninth financial mistake is one of the quietest and, at the same time, one of the most destructive in the long run. It's not building any kind of savings, not because you don't want to, but because you think it still isn't possible. There's a very common idea that you can only save money when a lot is left over. And since a lot is almost never left over, saving always gets postponed. Life goes on in if I can. If I can, I'll save. If I can't, it's fine. And since some unexpected expense almost always shows up, some squeeze, some urgency saving always gets pushed to the next month. The problem is living without savings isn't only a financial issue, it's a psychological one. Without any cushion, every surprise becomes a threat. Any expense outside the plan becomes a crisis. The person lives in a constant state of alert, even when everything seems calm. There's no real sense of safety, only the hope that nothing goes wrong. And living depending on luck is extremely exhausting. This mistake is expensive because it turns small problems into big dramas. A simple repair becomes desperation. A delay becomes panic. A change becomes chaos. Not because the problem is huge, but because there's no margin to absorb the impact. And that lack of margin keeps the mind locked in survival mode. Over time, the person gets used to living like this. The tension becomes normal. The fear becomes routine. And the most dangerous part is that this normalization blocks any progress, because when all your mental energy is being used to survive, there's no space left to plan, organize, improve. This mistake doesn't destroy only the present. It steals the future. It steals opportunities, steals choices, steals peace, Because without savings, every decision is made under pressure. And decisions made under pressure are rarely good. The 10th financial mistake ties all the others together. It's thinking the problem is a lack of discipline, when in reality, it's a lack of structure. The person believes they fail because they don't have enough willpower, because they can't stay consistent, because they always slip. And that belief creates guilt, shame, and self-sabotage. With every failed attempt to get organized, confidence shrinks. The person tries tracking expenses, tries controlling, tries cutting back, tries policing themselves. It works for a few days, sometimes weeks. Then routine gets heavy, exhaustion returns, life happens, and everything falls apart. And then a quiet thought shows up. Maybe I'm just not capable. This mistake is expensive because it makes you fight against yourself. Instead of creating a system that works even on bad days, you depend on motivation. You depend on energy. You depend on constant effort that isn't sustainable. And when that effort fails, the internal judgment comes. The problem was never a lack of discipline. The problem was always trying to fix financial chaos with willpower. As if it were possible to maintain perfect control in a life that's already overloaded. Without structure, any slip becomes a total relapse. Without structure, there's no stability, only isolated attempts. This mistake keeps the person stuck in a cycle of trial and error, hope and frustration. And the more that cycle repeats, the harder it becomes to believe anything can truly change. Not because there is no solution, but because every past attempt was done the wrong way. And here, quietly, all the mistakes connect. The procrastination, emotional spending, installments, comparison, waiting to earn more. I deserve it. The leaks, the confusion, the lack of savings, and the guilt over this supposed lack of discipline. These aren't separate problems. They're symptoms of a financial life without emotional and practical structure. When all these mistakes are seen together, something starts to become clear. The problem was never only money. It was never just numbers, salary, or overdue bills. The problem was always living in a constant state of alert. A financial life built without room to breathe creates a mind that never rests. The person doesn't realize it, but they spend their whole life reacting to collections, reacting to surprises, reacting to the balance, reacting to the fear of running out. There's no sense of solid ground, only the feeling of constantly balancing, trying not to fall. And that's exactly why so many organization attempts fail. They attack behavior but ignore the mental state. They try to correct spending without easing anxiety. They try to create control without creating safety. They try to impose rules on a life that's already too overloaded. At that point, an important, almost freeing realization appears. It's not possible to make good financial decisions when your mind is in survival mode. When everything feels urgent, nothing is truly planned. When fear drives choices, the short term always wins. The mistake wasn't spending wrong. The mistake was trying to fix everything at once without building a base, without creating even a small margin, without separating what's urgent from what's important, without understanding that clarity comes before control. And here something starts to change. Because when you understand money isn't only for paying bills, but also for reducing stress, the logic flips. The goal stops being have more left at the end of the month and becomes breathe better during the month. That shift is subtle but powerful. It takes the weight off perfection and puts the focus on stability. It's not about getting everything right. It's about stopping living on the emotional edge. The real turning point starts when someone understands that financial organization isn't about cutting pleasure. It's about reducing fear. It's not about living with less. It's about living with less tension. And that completely changes how you see money. Instead of asking, how much can I save? The question becomes, how much do I need to stop living on high alert? Instead of trying to control every expense, the focus becomes creating a small space of safety, even if it's still imperfect. That space doesn't have to be big. It has to be consistent, because the mind doesn't need much to leave panic mode. It needs predictability. It needs to know a small mistake won't become a disaster. It needs to know an unexpected expense won't knock everything down. When that space starts to exist, something curious happens. Decisions become less impulsive. Installments lose their grip. Emotional spending decreases. Comparison loses impact. Not because the person became someone else, but because fear stopped running everything. This is the part almost nobody explains. Financial organization doesn't start with a spreadsheet, it starts with relief. It starts when money stops being a constant threat and becomes a support tool. Not to get rich fast, but to live with more clarity. And that's why trying to fix everything at once never works. The solution isn't a sudden change, it's a transition. An adjustment that respects exhaustion, reality, and the emotional history of someone who's always lived under pressure. At this stage, guilt starts to fade. Shame starts to lose strength. And in its place comes something new. Still timid, but real. Maybe it's not all lost. Maybe the problem was never incapacity. Maybe it was just a lack of structure. At some point in this process, something shifts inside. It's not a shock, not a miracle turnaround. It's more like when an old pain starts losing strength. The person realizes they don't need to solve everything right now, that they don't have to handle every financial problem all at once. The chaos doesn't get organized with force, but with direction. Structure starts in a simple way, not by cutting everything, not by punishing yourself, not by trying to become someone you've never been. It starts by creating predictability, knowing what comes in, knowing what goes out, not with obsession, but with basic clarity. Not to control every penny, but to stop living in the dark. At that point, money stops being an invisible enemy and becomes something concrete, something you can look at without fear. Even if the numbers still aren't good, they stop being terrifying when they stop being unknown. Fear always grows in the dark. Clarity, even when it shows hardship, brings relief. From that basic clarity comes the most important possibility of all. Margin, not a big margin, not comfortable extra money. A small margin, but real. The space between what comes in and what goes out. A breath. This is where savings start to make sense. Not as a distant goal, but as emotional protection. Saving money stops being a heroic act and becomes a mental defense mechanism. You don't save to get rich, you save so you don't panic. So a small problem stays small, so a decision doesn't have to be made in desperation. And when that space starts to exist, even if it's still fragile, the mind changes. Choices change. Installments stop feeling necessary. Impulse spending loses urgency. Comparison loses power. Not because the person got stronger, but because they became less threatened. That's what almost nobody understands. Money doesn't bring peace because there's a lot of it left over. It brings peace because it creates options. It creates time. It creates distance between the problem and your reaction. And it's in that space that your financial life starts to mature. Discipline stops being a daily fight and becomes a consequence of the environment. The right decisions start happening with less effort. Not because the person became someone else, but because they stopped living in a constant state of emergency. Little by little, that feeling of always being behind starts to shrink. The fear of running out starts to quiet down. Mental exhaustion eases, and in its place comes something simple but rare. The feeling that control is possible. Not perfect control, human control. The most important thing is to understand none of this happens from one month to the next. It's not fast. It's not pretty. It doesn't make impressive stories, but it works because it respects reality, exhaustion, and life as it really is. And when that structure is solid, money stops being a daily emotional problem and becomes a logistics issue. Something that can be adjusted, planned, corrected without guilt, without shame, without desperation. In the end, the goal was never to reach a specific amount. The goal was always to free your mind, to stop living afraid, to stop feeling like a failure in silence, to stop thinking everyone knows something you don't. Financial organization, when it comes down to it, is that it's not about pretty numbers. It's about sleeping better, breathing better, thinking better, living better within your own reality. And when that becomes clear, your financial life stops being a constant weight and becomes quiet support. It doesn't solve everything, but it stops getting in the way. And that alone changes a lot. If this content has made sense up to this point, if this logic finally organized something inside you, it's worth reinforcing this now. Liking this video helps this kind of content keep existing. Subscribing to the channel is how you follow this journey with more clarity and less guilt. And if you made it to the end, comment the word clarity, because that shows the message wasn't just heard, it was absorbed.